Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay, and this is Reality Asserts Itself. We're continuing our series of interviews with Heiner Flassbeck, and Heiner now joins us in the studio. Thanks for joining us again. Heiner worked at UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and from 2003 to 2012, he was the director of the Division on Globalization and Development Strategies. Earlier in his career, amongst many accomplishments, he was the chief macroeconomist in the German Institute for Economic Research in Berlin between '88 and '98, and a vice minister from October '98 to '99 at the Federal Ministry of Finance in Bonn. So, in the end of the last interview, you were saying you hope for, and I put the words in your mouth, but you kind of agreed, a reasonable, more rational capitalism than we have now. A few years ago, about 3-4 years ago, I was at a conference at Bretton Woods that George Soros organized with this think tank he's created called INET. And he opened the conference and he looked out at everybody in the audience for quite a while, clearly trying to think of what to say, I think. And he started it with the words, he said, "I'm bewildered." Mm-hmm. And he says, "I don't understand what's going on." He says, "It is so obvious that the speculation, financial speculation, is completely out of control, that it's going to lead to a disaster. And there's things we could do about it, and no one will do anything, and it doesn't matter what people like me say, no one's listening to me." Which suggests that maybe you can't have this reasonable, rational capitalism. I'm not even suggesting Soros's model is reasonable or rational. It's another conversation. No. But you can't get even the most weak need regulation passed anymore, especially in the United States, but I don't think Europe's a heck of a lot better. You know, has that horse left the barn?
Yeah, it left the barn, that's true, and it's very difficult to get it back. For sure, I mentioned already that the Bretton Woods system, which was a reasonable approach to capitalism, so to say, was created under very unique circumstances.
Explain what that system was for people that don't know.
Well, it was a system where we had strong regulation on capital flows. We had the banks diminished to their proper service work for the economy to finance real investment. We had a global monetary system with rather fixed exchange rates so that not everybody could speculate with currencies and all these things. We had a lot of provisions that made the system stable. And we had strong intervention into the labor market on the one hand, or at least we had conditions on the labor market that gave people clearly the permanent expectation that they would get.
There was much higher unionization.
Yeah, there was high unionization, and there was a mood in this confrontation with the East, with the planned economies, that the West had to give something, that you had to sort of say calm down people by giving them
the Soviet Union was promising full employment, and that capitalism had to promise full employment.
Yeah, absolutely. That is surely one of the reasons that we had this confrontation, and the West had to give something to their people, because to calm down people and to make them happy in their system, the fight of the system was insofar quite productive, as it brought about a balance between capital and labor, which we after that never had again. In the mid of the 70s, we mentioned it already, we had the increase of unemployment, and then we had Thatcherism, Reaganism, and Reaganomics, and all that, and this led to a sharp shifting of the balance of power towards capital, and with the fall of the wall in the beginning of the 19th, that process even became stronger and stronger all over the place, because there was no confrontation anymore, and there was nothing to be given to the people.
So isn't that where we've come, you know, with Reagan and Thatcherism, and it has continued to today? Is that not the more natural gravitation then of capitalism, that the Soviet Union posed a threat, real or imagined, but whatever, it was perceived as that socialism actually was going to deliver a social safety net and full employment and so on and so on. So capitalism, particularly in Europe, both because of the strength of the unions, but also because the Soviet Union, East Germany is next door, has to prove that capitalism can give all these things and freedom, where the Soviet Union, you could only get this stuff if you give up your freedom. But once the Soviet Union starts to become clear is on the way down, and it's probably going to implode, then that goes away, and then from that point on,
yeah, but
this is the capitalism.
This is the capitalism up to the point of the crisis. When we had the big crisis in 2008, then there was a chance to change things, and we still have the chance to change things because we're not out of the crisis. We're not out of that crisis that started in 2008. So we're in the year 5 or 6 after the crisis, and we're not yet out. So this is a plain disaster. This is the same thing as we had with the Great Depression in the 30s. There was no confrontation of the system. The system in the planned system, Soviet Union, China was not important for the thinking of the northern or western countries. But
certainly in the minds of
people. But it was not really the confrontation as after the Second World War. Yeah. And at that time there were corrective forces. So the corrective force was the crisis. The Big Depression changed capitalism to a certain extent, and President Roosevelt was the one who did it. But looking back and looking into the history of the whole thing, it seems that it was due to very few people, and President Roosevelt was clearly one of the most important ones, who drove the whole thing into a different direction, who changed capitalism. And we haven't found a person like that.
Because the alternative model to save capitalism was Hitler.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, Hitler did it in his way. It was also the state who came strong. The state did everything. The state produced full employment. So it was similar, but under different political circumstances.
Based on militarization.
Yeah. Militarization, yeah, for sure.
But some people argue the same with Roosevelt. The real solution here was the war. So.
Yeah, but. Well, we do not have to go into that because that's a difficult question. But we do not have something like that. We do not have a shock like that. We do not have a person like that that would lead the world out of this desperate situation in which we are now. We have produced in Europe in the last 5 years. We have produced unemployment rates that are absolutely equal to the Great Depression. The United States is still in a stagnation of the overall economy. Monetary policy is trying desperately whatever is possible, crazy things that everybody would have considered to be crazy things 10 years ago, and so on. So we really have left, not left the recession and the recessive mode, and we're not out of the crisis. We're just trying to paper it over by extreme political measures because we haven't understood what is at stake at this moment, and what a kind of critical point capitalism has reached because of the distributive changes that we have seen in the aftermath of the long period of high unemployment, the balance of power shifting towards capital and labor left behind.
And what shape is Europe in? Because it's not on the headlines anymore. You know, a little while ago it was Greece, and before that it was Spain. But at least as far as American and North American news goes, it's kind of off the front pages now.
Yeah, it's coming back because of deflation. What we see now is clearly a move into deflation. A Japanese-like scenario. But what the Fed tried to prevent in the United States in the last years was a Japanese-like scenario where after such a crisis you fall into a deflationary mode. This is exactly happening in Europe, and the reason is very simple, but nobody talks about it. The reason is very simple, namely we're cutting wages. We're cutting everywhere wages. We have pressure on wages to be cut and wages to follow the German model, so-called model, where wages are not rising in line with productivity anymore. And this is executed in Spain, in Greece, in Portugal. They're trying to starting with that in France, or they're talking about it in France and Italy. This is already entering the whole European economy and into a deflationary phase. And again, it is the central bank. Everybody talks about a central bank. Their calculations, the IMF is joining in there, how much money the central bank has to spend now in buying bonds and other assets to avoid deflation. Nobody talks about wages. But it is absolutely clear, it's obvious, the evidence is so clear, they cannot, on nothing, we have clearer evidence than on the fact that wages are determining prices, or unit labor costs. So this is the premium of wages, nominal wage increases over productivity. This determines inflation, it's absolutely clear. And, but it is ignored by the whole profession. They're ignoring this fact.
Because break that down, what you just said.
What it means is then, as long as nominal wages rise in line with productivity, you have inflation 0. But all the countries want a certain positive inflation.
By nominal, you mean real wages?
Nominal wages. Nominal wages, so the wages that people get.
That's what I mean.
And these wages should be beyond a rise in line with productivity, but plus in line with an inflation target. So if you have an inflation target of 2%, then nominal wages should rise in line with the productivity increase, the expected productivity increase. So say the trend of productivity that you have in a country, in the United States would be 2%, plus the 2% for the inflation target, which would make 4% in the United States and in Europe overall. And only if you do that,
wage increases at 4% would keep a balance.
And that would keep a balance, and that would keep real wages rising by 2%. And it would keep the inflation rate on a stable growth path. That is exactly what we want, and to avoid deflation. As soon as you let high unemployment put pressure on wages, you have the unions are weak, you have reduced unionization and so on, then you get the imbalance, and the imbalance shows in two things. The imbalance shows in nominal wages not rising in line with this formula that I just mentioned, and not rising in line with productivity and inflation target. This puts pressure on deflation, and at the same time, as real wages are falling to a certain extent, at least, they reduce demand, and we see rising unemployment. This is the situation in Southern Europe. Southern Europe, we had huge pressure on nominal wages, so nominal wages are cut by 10–15%, which means that prices are falling by 10%, but nevertheless real wages are falling by 5%, and this depresses demand and unemployment is rising. So what you get is deflation and rising unemployment at the same time. This is the worst situation that you can imagine. Because then monetary policy is over. Monetary policy cannot fight that anymore because they cannot go below 0.
Monetary policy means lowering interest rates.
They cannot lower the interest rate below the 0 bound, so what economists call the 0 bound, namely below 0 it doesn't make sense. If you don't, if you ask people to pay money for a bank account, they don't come anymore. They don't bring it to a bank account anymore.
Your home, Germany, is essentially the powerhouse of Europe, and they're kind of managing all of this, and do not seem to mind what's going on.
We have, unfortunately, we have a very the poorest economic debate in the whole of Europe is happening in Germany. It's not happening in Germany because nobody is discussing these questions. We have a finance minister who has no clue about economics. He's talking about Swabian housewife, so to say, a micro example as being the model for the economic policy, which doesn't make sense at all. And the chancellor obviously is buying this kind of approach, so it's really absurd. I'm shying away from talking about it because I have to talk about my own country in these words, which is not the nicest thing you can do. But it's really like that. It's absolutely absurd. And I hope for a long time or for some time that the international discussion would change that a bit, but it's not happening. What we see is that France and Italy are following now. France has, the President Hollande has explicitly declared that he wants to follow the German model, and in Italy we hear similar things. So, but this doesn't exactly work anymore. If France and Italy are following this policy that Spain, Portugal, and Greece did already, then we will have rising unemployment in France and Italy, which will rise the unemployment rate in the whole of the European Monetary Union to 20% or something like that. Plus, we will see deflation, and then the euro will rise. So, international will have no repercussions and no positive effects for the Europeans because the euro will rise. That is what we see already. The euro has risen by something like 10% against the dollar in the last months since the beginning of the year. So the whole game is really absurd. It's a race to the bottom. They're running behind Germany. They're racing towards a dead end, and the overall effect will be deflation and deeper recession and more unemployment.
But isn't that what the German and European elites have wanted for a long time? As long as the Soviet Union was there as this supposed alternative system, they had to do this big social safety net and good pensions and long maternity leaves, and they had to share, with the working classes of Europe, a fairly significant portion of the wealth. And now they don't. And now they're taking advantage of this crisis to break the back of this whole infrastructure that was created after the World War II. And it seems like you're suggesting it's very irrational and it's heading to a dead end. But if I'm really rich and I'm sitting in Europe, maybe I'm thinking what I really want is I want an American-style low-wage economy. I want a really weak working class. I want high unemployment, and I want to sell stuff to Asia. And all, you know, the Chinese and Indians, Brazilians, whatever, they can buy our stuff, and we don't have to share any of this wealth with the workers of Europe.
No, but it doesn't work.
But do you not think must be how they're thinking?
Yeah, that's how they're thinking, sure. But if they would be a bit more rational, they would understand that it cannot work, because the whole world cannot export anything to nowhere, and we all know the Chinese and the Indians will not be the ones who run huge current account deficits and will take our goods. It's just the other way around. They want to run current account surpluses, so they want to sell more to our countries than the other way around.
Yeah, they're going to start a worldwide race to the bottom.
Yeah, it's a worldwide race to the bottom. That's right. Europe is engaging, or is maybe even the leader in that race to the bottom, but it doesn't make sense. For every reasonable capitalist should think about if the time horizon is at least, say, 10, 20 years, for someone who runs a company or owns a company, he or she should know that it cannot work, because you need consumers at the end. You need people who are able to buy the stuff that you're producing. And there are only you workers who are the ones who can buy the stuff that you're producing. Otherwise, someone will lose. Well, then you can hope that you're the survivor and the others will lose. Well, that always may be the motivation behind so microeconomic decisions, but in the end it cannot work, and every reasonable capitalist should know it cannot work. You need consumers, you need people who earn money, and earn not only money but earn as much as the productivity increase is in real terms. So because otherwise the productivity increase as such will lead to unemployment. That's absolutely sure. Well, and the United States was only, so to say, bridging the past 20 years by one instrument that is not there forever, namely by bringing down the savings ratio. You can survive a period where real income, real wages are not growing if the people are willing to reduce their savings ratio to 0 or something like that. But more than 0 is hardly possible, and then it's over.
Of the people that really own stuff and really wield political power, you know, I'm talking about that stratum of billionaires, the global oligarchs and all this. Have you met any that, I mean, I shouldn't say there are a few, I think, but there aren't very many, would you say, that are, using your words, reasonable or rational?
No, that's right. They are rational in their environment, maybe in their micro environment. They're not looking at the overall economy. That's right. And here we're lacking politicians who are pushing for rational solutions.
Well, they work for these various oligarchs.
But that's right. That's the plutocracy is what a plutocracy is, and that is why the plutocracy will hit the wall again. There's no way out. There will be a new crisis. Sooner or later, a bigger crisis than we have seen, maybe, and then either we find someone who understands these mechanisms and these relationships and changes the world, a politician or political leader, or I don't know, the whole system will collapse. I mean, what you see in Europe now, you see that right-wingers are taking over everywhere. Look at Hungary, look at France, where the Front National is coming up, the right-wing party, and so this is the near-term solution, so to say, the political solution, that you find people who are saying, well, globalization has failed, Europeization has failed, everything has failed, so we go back to our national frontiers and we close our borders, we live in splendid isolation.
Back to the 1930s.
Yeah, back to the 1930s. This is what is happening now, and then the race to the bottom for a time will be stronger than before, and then the end. But they have no solution at all. Also no solution, and then we will end up again in trade wars or other wars.
All right, we're going to continue this discussion with Heiner Flassbeck on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.